6 Points of Solar Accelerationism. By Alex Kotoff. Also known as transhumania. Quote, "To speak of limits to growth under a capitalistic market economy is as meaningless as to speak of limits of warfare under a warrior society. The moral pieties that are voiced today by many well-meaning environmentalists are as naive as the moral pieties of multinationals are manipulative. Capitalism can no more be persuaded to limit growth than a human being can be persuaded to stop breathing. Attempts to green capitalism, to make it ecological, are doomed by the very nature of the system as a system of endless growth." Murray Bookchin, Remaking Society, 1990. End quote. Recently, there has probably been no greater point of contention in the acceleratosphere than the question concerning ecology, an inquiry as to what technocapital will do such that it does not undermine its own teleoplexic growth in the anthropogenic climate crisis. Right acceleration supposes a technological singularity where the labor of the ecological is no longer needed. Zero acceleration, in contrast, supposes the ecological will win out. Unconditional acceleration supposes attempts to direct the process are futile, and green acceleration, with perhaps the most nuanced answer, supposes the problem concerns our mentality of anthropocentric extractionism. Baroque Spiral reasonably argues technocapital is not the genie, it is the bottle, so what we might strive to converge on is what is the most effective way to rub the bottle? Are zero-growth economies desirable futures? Or would it be a preferable alternative to just red-fine growth in the superstructure of neoclassical economics? 6 Points of Solar Accelerationism can be considered an open-ended project for conceptual engineering, serving as the Promethean antithesis to Baroque Spiral's thesis entitled 7 Points of Green Accelerationism, which critiques ecomodernism's solutions to the anthropogenic climate crisis, gengineering, terraforming terra, the Venus Project, Silicon Valley technogaianism, etc. Here Baroque Spiral states. 1. Climate change cannot be mitigated. Our greatest point of contention, as technocapital, is characterized by its deterritorialization, reterritorialization to be commensurate with whatever should interfere with its propagation, in this case, a question of whether it can successfully ground itself in the laws of thermodynamics to survive the coming crisis. In spite of the aforementioned Bookchin quote. 2. Climate change is not a problem of energy accounting. This is correct at a certain scale. But when reframing the assertion to an extraterrestrial scale, the biosphere itself is not a zero-growth closed system and is necessarily a positive growth open system, which perhaps can be partly mitigated by way of measuring solar input through a resource-based economy. 3. The Anthropocene cannot be directed. This, again, is true at some scale, as capital tends to violently resist central planning, though it's not to say parameters on growth can't still be set technocratically or physiocratically with some degree of interventionist success. 4. Technology is not apolitical and is inseparable from economics. This is perhaps the only point we completely agree on, hence why the reply might be entitled 6 Points of Contention rather than 7 points. 5. Eco-modernism poses no solution to extractivism. One might find extractivist abuse difficult to define, though not difficult to overcome if we were to enact the proper mutualist, Georgist or Pigovian solutions to formalize recognition of the ecological commons. 6. We need independence, not just interdependence. While Baroque Spiral acknowledges both to be important, it must still be emphasized that global recognition of ecological calculation for the commons should take precedence over separatist powers that recklessly and self-destructively deny its value. 7. Non-linear, non-human processes are incomprehensible by humans. While green acceleration does agree that technocapital can be understood in a multiplicity of reciprocal ecological relationships, one should not allow this agnosticism for calculation to yield ground in the emerging information economy to the extractive class. Information and ecology are deeply connected, and any theory of ecology should be accompanied by a theory of information. Green acceleration is an erudite and nuanced theory of capitalism that properly characterizes the acceleratosphere's neglect of environmental issues. But to play the devil's advocate, let us now propose 6 antinomies in defense of the widely despised gengineering solution. One might call these 6 antagonisms solar acceleration, shifting blame for the Anthropocene toward the ecologically epistemological and the economically axiological. It is not just descriptive, but is also interventionist and prescriptive. Perhaps we could start with 6 simple Promethean prescriptions. 1. Sustainable, not unconditional acceleration, techno-economics. Capital must mitigate the anthropogenic crisis and recognize its inability to grow infinitely on a finite medium. That which inevitably undermines its own capacity for self-propagation should not be sincerely considered a teleoplexic process. As in the contemporary era, the technological can no longer be separated from the economic or ecological. A process recursively bootstrapping towards greater telos eventually necessitates feedback sensitivity to the thermodynamic input fueling that process. If the process is to continue indefinitely, neoclassical economics is to be subverted by a framework with an objective conception of value grounded in the physical sciences. 2. Accelerate with the sun, not ahead of it, astroeconomics. The sun is the thermodynamic speed limit for the process of commoditization takeoff, as it grounds the root of all input for production in an observer-independent measurable entity. Economic growth that has achieved equilibrium with thermodynamic feedback must never exceed solar input if it is to be sustainable. Ecological sustainability can be defined as any economic process commensurate with the 3 laws of thermodynamics, whereby some positive growth would still be possible granted to the extent that technocapital can efficiently capture solar energy. Accelerating with the sun also opposes zero-growth economies, as the Earth, by definition, is not a closed system. There cannot be zero growth on the Earth for the same reason that there cannot be infinite growth. There is a fixed relationship of terrestrial inputs to outputs. Technocapital is, as the physiocrats called it, a free gift from the sun, the Promethean gift of fire unto humanity from none itself, a gift which entails continued but limited growth. 3. Count exergy, not energy, thermeconomics. The thermodynamic utility of solar input appreciates in value only insofar as it can be stored efficiently with limited waste. This entails an exergy accounting framework or measure of exchange by which the process can shrink the accursed share upon ecological shocks to supply and demand. 4. Commonize land, not machinery, geoeconomics. An exergy accounting framework for shrinking the accursed share need be grounded in feedback mechanics for the energetically efficient use of land. This can be incentivized by reconciling the antinomy between libertarian capital flight and generic taxation by way of a single tax on the unimproved value of land, which doubles as a Pigovian tax for unsustainable pollution of that land and a negative tax incentivizing its ecological restoration. Georgist and mutualist thought might do well to be more present in ecological discourse than they have been historically. Perhaps the only point Greens and Libertarians will ever find common ground on is this resurgent conception of agrarian justice. 5. Ecology, not psychology, bioeconomics. Unsustainable pollution of the land, as well as mental illness, class antagonism, and alienation are historically rooted in the dispossession of the commons by the ruling class and can only be corrected by indirect re-expropriation of ecology. Through macroecological calculation, value can be reconceptualized in the thermodynamic rather than the psychological, as the neoclassical synthesis still measures economic growth by subjective marginal utility, derivative of commodity fetishism. 6. Labor as information, not just energy. Information theory suggests a connection between the creation of order exergy through information entropy, and the creation of chaos entropy through information negentropy. In other words, stolen data is stolen labor. This concerns the discourse of data harvesting by the Cambridge Analytica scandal and the automation crisis caused by FAANG. FANG. Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, type companies with high market capitalization but few employees. This necessitates an transaction system for which the labor of information creation is recognized. The non-linear in human information economy, whether or not it is fully understood, too must be grounded both ecologically and thermodynamically in solar input. Information is unrecognized labor, and unrecognized labor cannot be appraised, so the appraisal of value in an economy necessitates a way to appraise the value of information creation. Solutions in an increasingly post-scarcity economy may also concern the discourse of UBI, universal basic income, and perhaps even UBE, universal basic equity/dividends, both increasingly dominant during the COVID-19 pandemic. A useful mnemonic would be to recall that SACCEL spells out the first letter of each point. Sustain growth. Accelerate with the sun. Count exergy. Commonize land. Ecology is labor. Labor as information. If we really wish to put an end to our ongoing international and social problems, we must eventually declare the earth and all its resources as the common heritage of all the world's people. Jix Fresco. Let 1,000 Venus projects bloom.